Order, order. Colin Lockhart moves the motion.
Thank you, Sir Roger. I beg to move that this House considers the future of farming. Thank you, Sir Roger, and it's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship and to bring this timely and important debate to the floor of the Chamber. I didn't think that in the other place that it would be being debated at the same time. However, we will progress. Farming has long been the backbone of our nation, underpinning food security, providing jobs and delivering significant environmental benefits. The agri-food sector across the United Kingdom contributes £148 billion to the economy and employs over 4 million people, including 462,000 directly in agriculture. It's an industry worth protecting and an industry worth speaking out for. Today, I speak not just as a politician, but as someone with farming in my blood. The daughter of a farmer, the wife of a farmer, and the mum of a little boy who dreams of becoming a farmer. The future of farming is deeply personal to me, as it is to the many of the 209,000 farm owners across the United Kingdom, including 26,000 of whom are from Northern Ireland. These are people who work 17 million hectares of land to feed the nation and care for the countryside. Their average farm size is 82 hectares and their contribution amounts to £13.7 billion annually to the UK economy. Yet they now face an existential threat from the proposed changes to agriculture property relief and business property relief. I will indeed.
Back to the farmers at this point, but in her opening comments, she mentioned that broader knock-on to the agricultural business and food sector right across the UK economy. Does she share my concerns that actually, whether it's the tractor manufacturers in Basildon in my constituency, or those who work in the farm shops in my constituency as well, those knock-on consequences are going to be huge for this if the tax changes which the government has proposed get put through, not just on the individual family farms themselves, who are obviously the backbone of our economy, but actually more broadly across all aspects of our rural and actually our urban economy.
Member for his intervention and couldn't agree more. The knock-on impact will be immense. The budget's decision to cap full inheritance tax relief at £1 million with a 20% charge above that will devastate family farms. These changes know no boundaries, and will affect countless small and modest family farm businesses. Independent analysis shows up to 75,000 farming taxpayers will be impacted over a generation, 5 times the government's initial estimate. In Northern Ireland alone, the Department of Agriculture predicts that 1/3 of farms and 75% of dairy farms will be hit the hardest. These figures are not plucked from the sky. These are real and evidence figures by the Department of Agriculture in Northern Ireland. Farmers face the grim prospect of selling off prime agricultural land, probably to big businesses who certainly don't want to use it for food production. It will erode our food security and end future generational farming because of a death tax. Just 3 weeks ago, I stood in front of 6,000 farmers at the Econ Centre in Lisburn, in Northern Ireland, who had braved Storm Bert to voice their concerns. Their message was clear: stop the family farm tax grab. The government must listen. If they proceed with this policy, it will not only destroy an industry that feeds the nation, but also tarnish their legacy with the destruction of rural communities and livelihoods. When asked about this government's legacy thus far, sadly, farmers and pensioners come to mind. I will give way.
Samuel Wilson.
Does she not find it really angering that this policy is justified by the government because they say a few big landowners buy up land as a way of escaping inheritance tax, and yet the impact of it is not to the big landowners. The impact of it is ordinary landowners such as she has described, and the impact on the countryside is going to be enormous.
Colin Lockhart.
you. Is exactly right. Big businesses will be the ones buying over the land, and they're not interested in farming it. Mr Chairman, I respectfully ask the Minister to heed the voices of farmers, backed by detailed analysis from the Central Association of Agricultural Valuers and others. Farmers know their industry best. This policy must be revisited to ensure the sustainability of farming for generations to come. Let us act now to protect the custodians of our land, the economic drivers of our rural areas, and the hand that feeds our nation. Moving on, our farmers face relentless challenges, and the abolition of APR is just the latest in a long list of blatant attacks. For too long, farmers have been denigrated and subject to some of the most draconian environmental restrictions. They're blamed for polluting waterways while raw sewage goes unaddressed. Across all 4 nations, farmers are held back by planning restrictions over ammonia, making it nearly impossible to replace or upgrade sheds. Despite these improvements benefiting the environment, farmers face real threats from disease, including blue tongue, TB and bird flu, with little effective support. And whilst a devolved issue, the point is still important. In Northern Ireland, herds of cattle are being slaughtered because of the lack of decisive action on TB, leaving farming families devastated and unsupported.
Member, give way on that point.
I will give way.
Would the member agree with me that there was a disappointment in regards to the bovine TB agenda that the recent Minister in Northern Ireland actually brought forward? There was no concrete proposals in it as to how to address it.
And whilst I don't thank the honourable member for his intervention, and whilst I don't want to get into a devolved issue, absolutely farmers are reeling from the lack of action being proposed by the Minister in Northern Ireland. Farmers are being increasingly forced to adopt measures under the guise of supporting environmental goals, but many of these come with significant concerns and costs. One such topical example is Bovaer, an additive aimed at reducing methane emissions from livestock. While it is being promoted a solution to agricultural environmental impact, it has raised serious questions in the minds of consumers about the long-term effects on animal health and consumer safety. Consumers are understandably concerned about the food chain, and farmers are left shouldering the burden of implementing often costly solutions with little clarity on their benefits or consequences. If we genuinely want to support sustainable farming, the government must ensure these measures are properly researched, justified and accompanied by meaningful support for farmers tasked with adopting them. But instead, what do they see from this government? A raft of policies that show nothing but contempt for British farming. In the past month alone, we've seen plans to abolish APR, a new tax on double cab pickups, the lifeline vehicle for many farmers coming into effect in 2025, and the galling revelation that foreign farmers are receiving $536 million from the UK aid budget, while our own farmers are left to struggle. British taxpayers' money is being used to fund low-carbon agriculture in countries like Brazil, the 11th richest nation in the world, Asia, Kenya, etc., while our own farmers face insurmountable challenges to their food security and sustainability. Mr Chairman, what good is environmental progress if we import more food from abroad, produced to lower standards and with a far greater carbon footprint than what we can grow here at home? Our food security matters, our British farmers matter, yet to this government it seems they do not. I implore the Minister to reverse course, listen to the voice of farmers and prioritise the future of UK agriculture before it's too late. Let us support the custodians of our land and the drivers of our rural economy and the people who feed our nation. Labour shortages are adding further pressure on an already stretched industry. Farmers are struggling to secure seasonal workers for picking and processing crops, HGV drivers, poultry workers, vets, butchers and abattoir staff. The workforce simply isn't there. If we want a farming sector capable of meeting the needs and the demands, this government must overhaul its schemes and work directly with those who know the industry best to address these critical shortages. At the NFU conference in 2023, the now Prime Minister said, "Losing a farm is not like losing any other business. It can't come back." You deserve better. The now Prime Minister wanted before the election a genuine partnership. We can't have farms struggling, a government that listens, stability and certainty. He wanted to roll up his sleeves and support our British farmers. Well, I call on his party, which is now in the driving seat, to pull back from this cliff edge and start to introduce policies and support our active farmers. I want to finish where I started. When we think of the future of farming, we must think of those little welly boots at the back door of farm dwellings. We need to support our young farmers, and I would call on the Government to do more, particularly in education terms. The very youngest in our society needs to know where our food comes from. Sadly, all too often the answer when asked is the supermarkets. I therefore would call on the Minister to address this with their counterpart in the Education Department. We need a syllabus and an education system that teaches our young people about the importance of our farmers. Mr Chairman, as we stand on the cusp of a vote in this place today, I believe it's important to note that a most recent poll demonstrated that more than half surveyed supported a farmers' strike on the basis that they are amongst the groups worst treated by this government. Those protests, I believe, are coming because farmers are at breaking point. An increased need for mental health support from rural support in Northern Ireland is being required by farmers. Reports of this getting too much for some to cope with and subsequently people taking it into their own hands. Farmers need our support. They need to know that their work, night and day, their efforts are appreciated and an integral part of our everyday life. In conclusion, at the event in the Econ Centre, hosted by the Ulster Farmers Union, I had the pleasure of meeting a next-generation farmer and a young mum, Lorraine Killen. Lorraine was inspirational as she addressed the crowd, talking about the uncertainty, the disappointment, the apprehension, the dread and the heartbreak, being just some of the raw emotions she felt as she reflected the reality of an industry under immense pressure and a way of life that is increasingly under threat. Today, let us redouble our efforts in this place to support and fight with every sinew to support our farmers. No farmers, no food.
The question is that this House has considered the future of farming. Sit down, please. We've got 13 members wishing to participate. About 24 minutes. I'm going to put on an immediate time limit of 2 minutes. And if you do the maths, you'll find that that doesn't work. There will be a division, I think, at around 5 o'clock. Injury time will be added on. We'll see how many members come back after the division, and I'll then reassess the situation. But for the moment, it's a 2-minute time limit. Sarah Smith.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I grew up in a rural community as well, and I know how hard farmers work. I know how long it takes for generations to pass on the expertise of how to manage and cultivate the land. It is not like any normal apprenticeship or training programme, but it is decades which are given as children learn how, over time, to get the most out of the land, to get the best yield, and to manage the ever-unpredictable set of circumstances that any year on a farm may bring. But I would like to suggest that the last thing that farmers need right now is the scaremongering that has been undertaken by the opposition benches on both sides and the vested interests that they are protecting of wealthy landowners who, it is not just a minority, are buying up the land. 50% of our farmland is being bought up by these people who are on record saying they are seeking it in order to avoid inheritance tax. And that is the issue that we are taking on. Because the average farmer in my constituency in Hyman has nothing to fear here. When you look at the numbers in detail, and unfortunately I don't have the time to offer them, it shows that they are protected from this tax. The average farmer, even when you look at arable land values and some of the higher values of their land, will not be impacted by this. But also that we talk a lot, and it is very real, and we have to acknowledge the challenges some farmers do face and the rural poverty in this country. But that is not, just one moment, that is not the fault of this current policy that we are looking at. That is decades of failure, and what's happened, particularly in recent years under the previous government, has failed to grasp how we support our farmers to become more productive so that they can earn the money that they ought to be. I will give way.
If the honourable member says that 50% of those affected are those who are investing in land, not as farmers, then isn't the answer to put the 40% capital gain or inheritance tax on them and 0 on the real farmers?
I should have said and didn't, but will now, that if any member chooses to intervene, and you're quite entitled to, I shall treat that as a speech, so you won't get called at the end. Sarah Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But the farming survey shows that actually the average earnings of the types of farmers that we may be speaking about are £96,000 a year. Profit that they are making, which actually means that even for those that may be impacted, as you referenced there, they are not falling to the same levels of inheritance tax that many people on similar incomes might be, but are being faced with inheritance tax at half of that rate. We know as well, through gifting, that they can avoid this if they undertake the necessary planning, and they can, of course, still protect their farmhouse, which I know is sometimes a concern raised, through the way that that can operate. So we have to keep coming back to the point that 75% of farmers, at least, will not be impacted by this at all. Our government has an ambitious plan for our farmers to invest that £2.4 billion into farming next year, to focus on sustainable food production and protecting nature, and getting £60 million out of the door through the Farming Recovery Fund, with a commitment to a further £208 million to save the collapse of our defences against disease, threats and protections.
Alex Easton.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. And well done to the member for Upper Bann for achieving this Westminster Hall debate. Today I should be able to address about a vision of optimism and resilience for the future of farming in Northern Ireland. Sadly, that is not the case. It appears with the proposed inheritance tax, the government knows neither the price farming families will have to pay or the value of their industry. Our UK agricultural heritage is the cornerstone of our economy, culture and communities, and it is critical for our future. The 26,000 farmers and their families in Northern Ireland deserve better. When taken with the food and drinks processing sector, we are looking at 70,000 jobs in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland's fertile lands and valuable climate have long supported diverse farming activities ranging from dairy and beef to crops like our world-famous potatoes. As we look to the future, the potential for growth and innovation in our agricultural sector is immense. We should today be looking at enhancing cutting-edge technologies such as precision agriculture, drones and sensors to increase productivity and ensure environmental sustainability. Our hard-working farming community want to enhance efficiency in order to protect our natural resources for future generations. They are the true guardians of the countryside. Sustainability is central to their vision. Our farmers are dedicated stewards of the land, committed to adopting eco-friendly practices like crop rotation, organic farming. They are committed to sustainability. Their efforts not only safeguard our environment, but also open new markets for our produce, meeting the growing global demand for environmental responsibility products. Farming is more than an economic activity, it's the backbone of our communities. This tax will place an undue burden on families, making it difficult for them to pass down to their farms in the next generations.
Order. Baggy Shankar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak under your chairmanship. Farmers play a significant role in keeping the nation fed and being the custodians of our beautiful countryside. Recognising their vital role, this recent budget is steadfast in its commitment to supporting British farmers. Over £5 billion has been allocated to the farming budget over the next 2 years to bolster sustainable food production and promote nature's recovery. And in my view and my understanding, that food security is national security, which is why supporting farmers to feed our nation remains a top priority. To further this, the government will leverage its purchasing power, ensuring that at least half of food produced for hospitals, for military bases and prisons is locally sourced and certified to meet high environmental standards. We have provided £60 million through the Farming Recovery Fund and allocated an additional £208 million to strengthen defences against disease threats, like we heard earlier on. Clear examples of a commitment to safeguard farming in the UK. This is what tangible support for British farmers looks like. And the members opposite can moan, but let's remember, since 2010, over 12,000 farmers and agriculture businesses have been forced out of business. Moreover, trade deals brokered by the Conservatives with New Zealand and Australia opened the UK to meat imports, produced to standards so low they'd be illegal here in Britain. That's their legacy on British farming. Non-farming investors have dominated land purchases, with over half of farms in the state sold being acquired by non-farmers. Meanwhile, a small number of wealthy landowners have disproportionately benefited.
Ms Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to congratulate the member from Upper Bank for bringing forward this important debate. Farmers are environmental stewards, custodians of our heritage and vital contributors to our local economies. Yet, under the previous Conservative government, rural and farming communities were totally undervalued and undermined. In my constituency of Chichester, over 18,000 hectares of farmland spread across 178 holdings produce some of the best food in the country. I have had the pleasure of meeting some of those farmers who tell me that their futures are now under threat. The Chancellor's 2024 budget imposes a series of damaging policies on rural communities. Cutting agricultural property relief risks the viability of family farms. In Chichester, this could affect nearly 50 farms. And when farmers are faced with the choice to either be in debt or sell off their land to pay the tax, the choice will be clear and our farms will be eroded. The introduction of the carbon border adjustment mechanism will add an estimated £50 per tonne to fertiliser costs. So combined with DEFRA's 1.9% cut in day-to-day spending, these changes will make sustainable farming practices harder to achieve. I will give way.
An interesting point. I recently met with a family of farmers in my constituency, and they mentioned the point about fertiliser too. It's not just the changes to inheritance tax that are going to clobber our farmers. It's a culmination of a perfect storm. So would my honourable friend agree with me that this is now coming down the tracks after a £227 million underspend by the Conservatives, and that we need a government that will now look to that and make sure that going forward they get the funding that they deserve?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I absolutely agree that it is a series of things that are compounded on top of each other that are making our farmers feel totally let down because they felt ignored by the Conservative government for years. And then when Labour stood on a manifesto pledge of change, they didn't think that this would be the change that they were being promised. Farmers in Chichester and across the UK deserve better. They are critical to our food supply, our environment and our rural way of life. So I urge the government, please stop undermining them and start supporting them. Let us work together to ensure that farming remains a thriving and sustainable pillar of our nation for generations to come. And I would call the government to look at the Liberal Democrats' pledges in our manifesto, such as a £1 billion increase in the farming budget to support sustainable agriculture, renegotiation of our trade agreements to protect British farmers from being undercut by the imports that are failing to meet UK standards, and a reinstatement of the capital grant scheme to support environmentally friendly farming practices. I'm very aware that many members want to get in, so I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Aldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Roger. I think we can all agree that food security is national security. The future British farming deserves a stable government with a funding strategy reflective of that significance. I and so many others welcome this government's £5 billion increase to the farming budget over the next 2 years, the largest budget for sustainable food production in our history. The size and scale of the commitment to our farming future is unprecedented and is not talked about enough. These reforms will future-proof our domestic food production and food security, with reforms and investment all detailed online. I won't go through them now because we don't have time. When the political winds have blown the opposition onto another topic, we will be here in government to work with farmers on improving the sector and its resilience. And as has been identified by... Yes, of course, Jane.
Would the honourable member agree that the best thing this government can do is give some direction and certainty to farmers at this point with the new land use framework and the new pipeline of SFIs which are upcoming to balance food production, nature recovery and carbon reduction so they have the confidence to invest and to return to profit?
As so often, I agree with my fellow South West MP, but as has been identified by my honourable friend, the neglect of the previous government is what we're actually trying to fix with this budget. I feel it is important to say that so many of my constituents in Weston-super-Mare are dismayed at the idea that tax relief of up to £3 million isn't enough. These are finances outside the concept of the vast majority of my constituents, and we're living in a community where we all work together. The rhetoric we're hearing is quite divisive. It's a hard pill to swallow when so many have little or no savings or prospect of owning any property to pass on to their children. Many millions of people, including farmers across the country, are working harder than ever to pay for the basics their families need simply to survive. This government is simply saying in any community, those who can pay more should.
Lee Chance.
Thank you, Sir Rod. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'm going to focus my comments here today on areas where I think perhaps we can achieve a degree of cross-party agreement, because I've already heard agreement that farmers are the stewards of the land. I think we can agree that farming is a very diverse sector, and indeed farmers as a group are a very diverse group, and that is something we do need to bear in mind whenever we're making policy. But I'd like to reflect 4 points that farmers in my constituency of North Herefordshire have pointed out to me. The first is that farmers need long-term policy certainty. The previous member talked about a record investment in farming, but in fact, in real terms, that's effectively static. What we need is a really significant ramping up of government support for the funding sector. The Nature Friendly Farming Network has called for a doubling of the farming budget. That is a call that I and the Green Party strongly support. We need far more investment in environmental land management schemes and the long-term certainty that farmers need to be able to make decisions to put land into those schemes. The second thing that farmers say to me is that they want better regulation of the food sector, better and more even balance of power between farmers and supermarkets, for example. Too many of them feel under the cosh, price takers, not price makers. And that's a real problem. And also the phenomenon of farm washing, where supermarkets pretend that their food is grown on lovely family farms all over the UK, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. We need clear government regulation on this. The third thing, already referenced by a member, is about the government's role in public procurement. I'm glad that the government is taking some initiative on this, but there's far, far more that could be done, particularly to make sure that schools provide free school meals, free universal school meals, based on procurement of local, sustainably grown food.
Order.
Thank you.
Division on the floor of the House. The sitting is suspended for 15 minutes or 25 minutes if there is a second division. Order, order. Order. This may seem slightly strange because everybody was expecting a second division, but the clock says the clock is, and we're over 15 minutes, so I'm going to start with or without members who are not present, if you see what I mean. And if you do, then tell me what I mean. Sorry, Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Roger, and delighted to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Upper Bann for securing this important debate. 17% of Scotland's population is rural and delivers some of the best agricultural produce in the world. 76% of the land in my constituency, Aberdeenshire North and Murray East, is used for agriculture, and farms are incredibly important to the local economy. Labour shortages are something that I know has impacted farms across Aberdeenshire. Food can be left unpicked in farms due to labour shortages, and this needs to be addressed, especially following Brexit and the associated migration changes. Even a regional visa for rural farms in Scotland would be an incredible help to farms in my constituency. Technological solutions cannot currently solve labour shortages. In the meantime, the risk is that without the right amount of labour, at the right time, these types of farms can become unviable in Scotland. A discussion about the future of farming would be remiss to not include recent changes to agricultural property relief. In my constituency, many farms have been in touch expressing their concerns about this change and the significant financial burden it places on family farms. I am of the view that this will be damaging for rural communities and farms across the UK, never mind Scotland, and I would like to see a reversal of this policy. Something I am sure members here in the UK Government understand is that food security is national security, and I welcome any action to secure this going forward. It is key to get more people buying local produce, supporting local farms, and in turn reducing emissions and supply chain issues. Finally, I am delighted to learn of the commitment today by the Scottish Government to support farmers in Scotland, including an investment of £660 million and a capital transformation scheme of £20 million in 25-26.
Anne Davies.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. Can I thank the member for Upper Bann for securing this debate? And I'd also like to declare an interest as a tenant farmer myself. Farmers in Wales feel threatened by the approach that this government is taking to inheritance tax. And what concerns me is that the approach taken threatens the viability of working family farms. The UK Treasury data used to calculate the impact includes small holdings and non-working farms, distorting the number of Welsh farms affected by inheritance tax thresholds. The Farmers Union of Wales says, had the Treasury specifically focused on mainstream farms responsible for the bulk of agricultural outputs in its estimates, then the proportions affected by changes to agricultural property relief would be revealed to be far higher than they claim. The FUW estimates that farmers responsible for nearly 90% of Welsh food production could be in scope to pay inheritance tax. And this would be devastating for farmers in Wales, as the average income for different types of farms is much lower than the potential inheritance tax that would be charged. For livestock farms, which predominate in Wales and make up to 70 and 80% of Welsh farm holdings, potential inheritance tax bills can be many times the annual income of such farms. And it would also impact tenant farmers, with around 30% of Welsh agricultural land rented. Reduced availability of rented land could lead to business closures, homelessness, and a decline in new people entering the workforce. It's clear that Wales's needs have been ignored so far by the Treasury. And will the government listen to the likes of the FUW and NFU Cymru, who are calling for a Wales-specific analysis for the impact of the changes to the APR? Diolch.
Order. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, can I thank the Honourable Lady for Upper Bann for working so hard to keep the plight of farmers throughout the United Kingdom in the mind of this Parliament. She does her constituency credit, as always, declaring interest as a member of the Ulster Farmers Union and as a landowner and farmer. This is an issue I've spoken on so many times, and yet I do not grow tired of doing it. The reason is very clear. Without small family farms, there is not food sustainability and subsequently food safety. Some 25,000 farms in Northern Ireland, most of them are small family farms run by one or two farmers. These are not massive profit-making industries that perhaps government is led to believe believe they are. They may be land rich, but they're cash poor, who love the land, who have it in their blood, and do not toil to make a massive profit, but to pay the bills and continue doing what they love. The fact is that most of those farms, 65% farmers, already couldn't survive with this inheritance tax. This does not pave the way for food security or production in Northern Ireland. We do not have large farms making millions per year. We have families who are working farms that cannot even pay a living wage. Some of the best farms in my constituency see the sons working the farms and also working privately for income, as they can't raise a family on the income. That's reality in Northern Ireland. And Minister, I beseech you to listen to the points that I'm making, because they're made with sincerity and honesty. Now we add to this the inheritance tax and remove the protection from the farming grant. We are left with unprofitable farms, sons and daughters who have no option but to sell the land and get a job. The end of farming, as we know, is not simply sad in terms of history and the lifeblood that flows through farming families, but is worrying as it leaves us beholding to other nations for our food. Average farm in Northern Ireland, acres, £14,000 an acre. Add that up, Minister, I would ask your civil servant to do that. And it's a 100-acre farm average. It means that the threshold is quickly reached. And for many farms in Northern Ireland, and those generations will mean it can be done if government looks at it honestly and comes up with a different scenario and a different threshold. And the quicker they do it, the better. Thank you.
Milne.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. My constituency of Horsham includes a mix of rural and urban areas, but this tax hurts both. And that's my key point I want to make. Local farms don't exist in isolation. They're part of an ecosystem of businesses that depend each on each other to thrive. A local farmer, James, has told me about his farm, which has been in his family all the way back to 1904. James supports his young family and elderly relatives. It's not just a full-time job, it's 3 full-time jobs. And that's because to operate the farm successfully, James now runs 3 businesses: a fallen stock collection business, a pet cremation business, and the farm itself. Without diversifying in this way, he might have gone under a long time ago. Farming alone often isn't enough for many farms to keep their heads above water. Now he faces a national insurance hike, a sharp acceleration in the phasing out of direct payments under the basic payment scheme, and the removal of APR and BPR. How many businesses do we think one farm has to run before they simply break? Yes, there is a problem with non-farmers investing in land to avoid tax, but this family farm tax isn't the way to fix it. There's too much collateral damage. It's going to hit too many farmers like my constituent James, with a family to support, a business to run on slim margins, and a community that relies on them. This tax comes on top of the pressures imposed by a botched Brexit and trade deals that threaten to bring down the high standards of British farms. The money raised by this tax won't go anywhere near to plug the budget black hole. Rather, we need to recognise that a strong farming community is our best ally in moving forward towards a sustainable food system, job-filled rural communities. So I call upon the government to work with the farming community to build a national food strategy that benefits farmers in the fields and the shoppers in our supermarkets. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Many hundreds of family farmers in the constituency of Boston and Skegness are appalled at this family farm tax. And just last week, Richard and his son Jake came to see me. It's been in the family for 120 years. They went through the cost increases recently, the fertiliser tax, basic payment scheme down, the carbon tax, and now the national insurance tax is up. And they're saying, if with this farm tax, they won't be able to afford to pay it, even with the 10-year payment time frame, and therefore they will have to sell upon death. And I think what this is doing is the exact opposite of what the government wants, which we all want, which is growth. And yet I've had farmers tell me, one specifically said, he's cancelled £1 million expansion to his strawberry farm. Another farmer has said he's cancelled an order for a £300,000 piece of equipment. So what this is going to do is have the exact opposite of what the government wants. And actually there is a very simple solution to this. Increase the tax threshold on which it's payable and increase the qualifying period threshold on which people benefit from the tax relief. With that, then the government can achieve its aims, avoid the abuse, and family farmers can continue to invest. Thank you, Chairman.
Jim Allister.
pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. In Northern Ireland, land prices are in some cases twice as high as in other parts of the United Kingdom. So the consequence of that is that the threshold will be reached quicker and that the burden will be even greater. But where I think there's a real cruelty about this farm tax is this. Many farms, when they're taken over by one generation, they naturally want to grow and expand to improve their productivity. And very often during a lifetime, extra land will be bought. That extra land is bought with money upon which tax has already been paid. So this is a double taxation. You buy land from profits you've made upon which you paid your tax, and then when you die, the government comes looking again. That is so unfair. And it's so unfair, particularly when it is family farms which are being crucified by that tax. Yes, I understand those who are exploiting the market, who are not interested in farming, but interested in tax relief in order to, and they own land for that purpose. Yes, hit them with all the might you can. But hit them with the 40% inheritance tax and exempt the genuine farmers, those who have a farm business number, those who are in receipt of direct payments, those who are genuine active farmers. If you exempt them and go harder after those who are exploiting the system, then you probably have the same return at the end of it. And wouldn't that be far more equitable than what's being proposed?
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the member of Upper Bann for bringing this debate. But Sir Roger, I want to take exception in regards to language that has been used by government MPs here today, but also in the debate that we had in the other place on the 11th of November, when they accused anyone who raised concern, genuine concern, in regards to family farms, that we were either in the pockets of big business or indeed that we were alarmist in any way. Sir Roger, I can assure you, for those members that I know that have spoken in here and spoken in the other place on this issue, is about a genuine concern and understanding of the effects that this family farm tax benefit, or tax grab, is going to have on our family farms. I was so concerned, Sir Roger, that I asked for clarity in regards to the figures that I had used from the Northern Ireland Agriculture Minister. He responded to me, "I'm disappointed at the UK Government's dismissal of the figures you quoted, and the subsequent comment that our analysis that 1/3 of farmers and up to 75% of dairy farms will be affected by the new inheritance tax limitations as alarmist. I can assure you that these figures are based on a solid analytical basis from data collected as part of the Northern Ireland Agricultural Census 2023. Sir Roger, the many differences I may have with them, but I would rather believe the Agricultural Minister in Northern Ireland rather than what I've heard coming from the Labour Government in regards to how this will actually impact Northern Ireland farmers. 2023 Irish Farmers Journal survey showed that the average price of agricultural land in Northern Ireland is £13,794 per acre. Therefore, by 2026, when the inheritance tax limitations change to take effect, it would be reasonable to assume that the average price will have increased to £15,000 an acre. Therefore, based on that information, farms with land of 67 acres in Northern Ireland will be affected by this tax grab.
For the Liberal front bench, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I wish to congratulate the honourable member for Upper Bann for securing this important debate. Farmers are the very foundation of rural communities, the length and breadth of the country. They put food on our tables, steward our countryside and sustain rural communities. Farming is more than a profession. It is part of Britain's identity. And as the honourable member said in opening the debate, something that's worth protecting. Now, I have the privilege of representing many farmers in my constituency of Newbury who are vital to our local community and our way of life. Farming, Sir Roger, is a uniquely slow-moving industry, heavily influenced by seasonal uncertainties. In such an unpredictable landscape, scaling up operations becomes essential for achieving profitability. Yet, despite these mounting pressures, successive governments have failed to support our farmers. I'm sure, Sir Roger, that Labour members... no, I won't give way. I'm sure, Sir Roger, that Labour members never expected to vote for small farms to close or to be swallowed up by large landowners. But that is what will happen as a result of this policy. In 22-23, the Conservatives underspent the promised funding to farmers by £227 million and failed to adjust England's farming budget to keep pace with inflation. Labour's manifesto made no mention of the agricultural budget, signalling from the outset that this government does not prioritise protecting our farming industry. The changes to agricultural taxation in the recent budget represent yet another blow, threatening the future of small-scale farms and rural communities across the country. Whilst I understand the challenges that the government finds itself in due to the black hole left by the previous government, it does not excuse the recent decisions to impose such harsh tax burdens on vital industries. Now, the government claim that only 27% of farms will be affected by these changes. This equates to 55 farms in Newbury, a similar number to the honourable member from Chichester. However, this figure is based on HMRC data from 21-22 and risks significantly underrepresenting the true impact. The NFU warns that in reality around 75% of commercial family farms will exceed the 1 million threshold, making them subject to this tax change. Liberal Democrats, Sir Roger, are deeply concerned that this will impact family-run farms, outpricing young farmers from the industry, as well as other rural businesses which rely on the farming economy. Additionally, over the last week, the government abruptly paused the Capital Grant Scheme, a crucial resource for funding sustainable farming projects. It is vital to allow farmers to carry on their work, which is essential to public safety, including managing floodwater and storing slurry safely. It's incredibly concerning that the government has decided to freeze it without warning. This is even more concerning given the government has made cuts to the basic payment scheme on the basis of expanding environmental grants to farmers. On top of these cuts, farmers have seen their input costs rise sharply in recent years. However, the price they get from their produce at the farm gate has fallen. Now, I recently met with farmers in my constituency too, Sir Roger, and during this meeting, one farmer shared that he's worked his land for many years and was looking forward to this year being his first ever year of being able to make a profit. He calculated that effectively his hourly wage as a farmer is just £6.22 an hour, half the national minimum wage. Another farmer shared that only 15 pence of every pound spent on agricultural products actually goes back to farmers, highlighting the tight margins of which they operate. And according to Riverford Organic, 61% of farmers in the United Kingdom fear they could be out of business in the next 18 months as a result of this Labour government's proposal. Farmers are at the forefront of protecting our natural environment, but it's extremely important we provide them with the support they need so that they can ensure that they continue their work. We look to the future of farming. It is vital that the government does not make the same mistakes as its predecessor and undervalue rural communities. So in conclusion, Sir Roger, I urge the government to raise the farming budget by £1 billion, as outlined in the Lib Dem manifesto, renegotiate those trade agreements to protect British farmers, and strengthen the Groceries Code Adjudicator to ensure farmers can keep farming in fair circumstances. It's essential to our country. It's vital that we protect farmers at all costs. The government's proposed changes threaten the future of farming and place undue pressure on this critical industry. I am proud to represent so many hard-working farmers in Newbury. I and my Liberal Democrat colleagues will continue to fight tirelessly to ensure their survival and success for generations to come.
Dr Neil Hudson for the opposition. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and it's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. Can I commend my honourable friend, the member for Upper Bann, for bringing this important forward-looking debate, but also highlighting the challenges facing our farming communities, not least their mental health. In Parliament today, we've had the biosecurity debate in this chamber this morning that I spoke in. We've had the family farm tax debate just concluded, and we have this current debate. 3 debates in one day that relate to farming says how important these issues are to this House and our constituents and the farmers who feed us and look after our precious environment. No, I'm not going to give away, I'm afraid. We will all be aware of the ongoing situation with blue tongue virus, avian influenza, bovine TB and other diseases, and threats, I won't give away, and threats from outside the UK, from African swine fever to foot and mouth disease, and the challenge that they pose to our livestock farmers, our economy and our national security. As I said earlier this morning in this chamber, biosecurity is national security. And while I note that the government has chosen to allocate £208 million for the transformation of the APA HQ in Weybridge, I urge the Minister to make representations to the Treasury to make sure that the Animal and Plant Health Agency HQ at Weybridge is funded in full. The previous government rightly committed in 2020 £1.2 billion to start this off, but now we need the further full £1.4 billion to complete this critical national security measure. It is vital that we also make use of new technologies and technologies moving forward to further build our national resilience against livestock disease and protect human, animal and plant health. The Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Act brought in by the Conservative government will help with this in terms of disease resistance in plants and animals and climate-resilient crop development. Likewise, wider innovation in machinery, horticulture, farming practices and sustainability are all positive processes moving forward. But the elephant in the room today is the family farm tax. And we cannot have a debate when we're not including this. I'm not going to give away, I'm afraid. This tax hits at the very heart of the future thinking in farming, taking aim at the bond between farming parents and their sons and daughters, and punishing farming families who have worked their land for generations for acting in their best interest for their children and their grandchildren and for our country by looking after our environment and feeding our nation. What possible incentive can there be for sustainable, thoughtful farming or for the improvement of productivity of a field, a flock or a herd when after a farmer has passed, the farm will have to be broken up to pay for this unfair inheritance tax? There have also been, as we've heard today, worrying developments in the government's approach to capital grants. These vital lifelines that make wider environmental objectives of the ELM schemes possible have been, for some bizarre reason, suspended by this Labour government, with no warning and no phase-in period. Farmers want to be able to deliver food for our country in an environmentally friendly way. But that will be only possible if the government of the day, whatever political colour, is prepared to support them on that journey. The slashing of these grants is another hugely damaging development when we consider the future impacts on our farmers, which is what we are considering in this debate today. In conclusion, Sir Roger, we must clear away the dark clouds of this ill-judged, short-sighted Labour budget, and in particular, this heartless family farm tax, which will damage food security, hollow out rural communities and will deeply impact the mental health of the people living and working in these sectors. The government must start listening now. They must reverse this awful tax, so we must help our farmers see some sunlight on the horizon. In conclusion, Sir Roger, biosecurity is national security. Food security is national security. The government must start listening and actually look after the communities that nurture these critical factors for our country. I urge them to consider what they're doing and actually do the right thing.
Minister, you have until 5:48. Mary Cray.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your very crisp chairmanship today. I pay tribute to all honourable and right honourable members for managing to whittle down what must have been very long speeches into very short, but nonetheless well-received and well-delivered speeches. And can I also start by thanking the honourable lady for Upper Ban, not just for securing this debate, but for her work, representing her party here in Westminster as a spokesperson on environment, food and rural affairs. And she well knows that agriculture is a devolved issue, but we are committed to working closely with devolved governments as we work to support British farmers and boost the nation's food security. And my colleague Baroness Hayman is actually in Northern Ireland tomorrow, meeting with large food producers and the Ulster Farmers Union and the Agriculture Minister. And as the daughter of a Fermanagh beef farmer, as the granddaughter, I should say, of a Fermanagh beef farmer, I too have farming in my blood. My colleague, the Farm Minister, has many talents, but he has not yet acquired the skills of cloning himself. So I'm here as a pale substitute for him today. And thank you all very much indeed for the comments that you have raised. We will never forget that farmers are the beating heart of our great country, and farming and food security are the foundations of a healthy and resilient economy, local community and environment. We know that it is the hard work of our country's farmers that puts food on the table and stewards our beautiful countryside, which is why, despite the very difficult fiscal situation, we are maintaining the total level of government support to farmers across the UK. In the devolved governments, we are removing the ring fence to respect the devolution settlement and providing the same level of funding in 25-26 as they are receiving in 24-25. In England, we have committed £5 billion to the farming budget for England over 2 years, including more money than ever for sustainable food production, which enables us to keep momentum on the path to a resilient and more sustainable farming sector. Environmental land management schemes will remain at the centre of our offer to farmers and nature in England, receiving £1.8 billion in the financial year 2025-26. And what is more, Sir Roger, we announced that we will rapidly release £60 million through the Farming Recovery Fund. This will support farmers, including those on family farms, affected by unprecedented extreme wet weather last winter. Roughly 13,000 farm businesses, including family farms, will receive an exceptional one-off payment to help with severe flooding. This government is also investing £208 million so it can protect the nation from disease outbreaks that threaten the industry, food security and, crucially, human health. All this is part of the government's New Deal for farmers. On a UK-wide level, we're working to cut red tape at our borders and get British food exports moving again, working to protect farmers from being undercut by shoddy trade deals done by the previous government. We will lower energy bills for farmers by switching on GB Energy and introduce grid reform to allow them to plug in their renewable energy into the national grid. We will use government purchasing power to back British produce, so half of our food in hospitals, army bases and prisons is locally produced or certified to high environmental standards. And we will be introducing a land use framework which balances long-term food security and nature recovery, and critically introduce the first ever cross-government rural crime strategy to crack down on antisocial behaviour, fly tipping and GPS threat, a subject of which I have had many happy hours in this chamber. Let me turn to the agricultural property relief changes and address that head on. I know that there has been a huge range of figures and analysis quoted on all sides. The Treasury's figures show that 500 estates a year will be affected, and this is based on the hard data of actual claims. That figure is endorsed by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. It includes the impact of APR, but also with BPR, Business Property Relief, nil-rated inheritance allowances and other capital allowance. Now, the government has and will continue to engage with the NFU, CLA, TFA, MPs and other stakeholders around this issue. Let me just make some progress. The reforms will not be introduced until April 2026. So there is still time for farmers to plan for the changes and, crucially, to get professional advice on succession planning. I give way.
Yeah, I've got to do the same again. My honourable friend and colleague and I both have contacted the Ulster Farmers Union in Northern Ireland. We've spoken specifically to John McClellan, the legal officer. He has told us quite clearly that 65% of farmers in Northern Ireland will be impacted upon this. Whenever I hear his legal opinion, and unfortunately, Minister, with great respect, the legal opinion you just referred to, what a chasm of difference there is. Somebody's telling porkies. I don't know who it is.
Very great.
With any fiscal change, you look at the previous year's figures to see what the impact was. So I think I'm not going to get into the analysis around the figures, but I do want to make some progress. But those figures have been verified by our independent fiscal authority, the OBR. We know that the current use rules have been used by wealthy landowners to avoid inheritance tax, and currently the largest estates pay a lower inheritance tax than smaller estates. This is not fair or sustainable. I give way.
Does the Minister agree that it falls to this government, following the abject failure and economic incompetence of the previous government, to deal with this rampant speculative acquisition of farmland by closing the tax loophole that has been exploited for too long, and that if the Conservatives really cared about the future of farming, you would think that they would have more than one MP here, with the exception of the Shadow Minister and the Chair?
Right.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I think that shows the reason why the government is better targeting tax relief to make them fairer and to protect the smallest family farms. We believe this is a fair and balanced approach that safeguards small family farms whilst also fixing the public services that farming families rely on. They will be able to pass the family farm down to their children, just as previous generations have always done. Now, I want to make a couple of quick points. The Honourable Lady mentioned Bovea, the additive. Now, we know that agriculture is one of our largest emitting sectors, and we consider that methane-suppressing feed products are an essential tool in the decarbonisation of the agricultural sector. This feed has been approved by the Food Standards Agency, the FSA, for use in the UK for use as a feed additive. It was approved in April 2024. The authorisation process assesses evidence on animal health, consumer health and environmental safety, and also assesses the evidence provided to demonstrate the methane reduction efficacy of the product. Bovea is fully metabolised by the cow and is not present in milk or meat, so there is no consumer exposure to Bovea. So I do hope I've been able to reassure the Honourable Lady on that point. I want to also discuss the carbon border adjustment mechanism raised by the Honourable Lady for Chichester. The introduction of this mechanism, including on imports of specific fertiliser products, was first announced by the previous government in December 2023. It will not come in until 2027. It is intended to address carbon leakage, which is the movement of production and emissions from one country to another due to different levels of decarbonisation effort. About 70% of UK agri-food imports come from the EU, and fertiliser used by EU farmers will have already faced a carbon price. So many non-EU imports cannot be produced in the UK, so the Treasury expects the impact on UK farmers to be modest and that there will be no material impact on food prices. On capital grants, we've seen an unprecedented demand, and we are going to we will continue to process the applications already received, accept new applications for woodland tree health grants. Capital grant plans and management plans are important to help CS higher tier arrangements, protection and...
Order. Sitting stands adjourned.
I've got all my lines and I didn't get them out. Sorry.
Aaron.